It was a scorching Friday afternoon in Bridgeport, just outside the bustling city center. Officer Greg Matt sat in his patrol car, savoring the last sips of his lukewarm coffee, having just wrapped up his lunch break. The usual noise of the busy downtown streets drifted over, but Greg was lost in his thoughts, staring blankly out the windshield. Greg was the kind of cop who felt like the badge on his chest made him untouchable. Someone who could do as he pleased and treat people however he wanted. And today, that misplaced sense of power would lead him to a mistake he'd regret for the rest of his life. Across the street, a man in a sleek black suit stepped out of a nearby cafe. His name was Marcus Harris. Calm, collected, and carrying himself with an air of quiet confidence, Marcus crossed the street with purpose. Though he'd grown up in Bridgeport, he'd spent the last few years working in another city. What Greg didn't know, what no one knew, was that Marcus had recently been promoted to captain at this very precinct. He was now Greg's boss. But that little detail would remain hidden until it was far too late for Greg. As Marcus walked toward him, Greg's gaze shifted from his coffee to the man. There was nothing about Marcus that stood out, no reason for suspicion. But for someone like Greg, any excuse to make trouble was good enough. He squinted, gripping the steering wheel tighter, watching the stranger's every step. There was something about the way Marcus carried himself that rubbed Greg the wrong way. Without warning, Greg shoved open the door of his patrol car with a force that made it slam against the frame. He stormed up to Marcus with a scowl on his face. "Hey you, what are you doing around here?" Greg barked, stepping directly into Marcus's path. His tone was harsh, meant to intimidate. Marcus stopped walking and looked at Greg with calm, almost surprised eyes. "I'm just on my way to a meeting," he said, his voice steady and respectful. Greg wasn't having it. "You look like you're up to no good," he sneered, stepping even closer, trying to provoke a reaction. "Got any ID?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Slowly, he reached into his jacket to pull out his wallet, making sure his movements were controlled, deliberate. "I'm happy to show you my ID, officer," he replied coolly. Before Marcus could even fully pull out his wallet, Greg snapped. His temper flared like a fuse burning down. "You think you can talk to me like you're some big shot?" Greg growled. Without warning, he grabbed Marcus's arm with a rough, aggressive yank. Before Marcus could react, Greg swung his fist. It landed squarely on Marcus's face with a sickening thud. The punch was hard enough to make Marcus stumble back, but he quickly regained his footing, his expression still calm, even as he raised his hand to his cheek, where the bruise was already starting to form. The few passers-by who had witnessed the scene stood frozen, mouths agape. A few whispered to each other, unsure of what they had just seen. Greg, feeling emboldened by the blow, smirked. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," he said, clearly enjoying the power rush. But just as he turned to walk away, Marcus stood taller. His eyes, which had once been neutral, were now sharp with authority. "You just made a big mistake, officer," Marcus said, his voice low, dangerous. Greg froze, still not realizing who he was dealing with. "Oh, yeah. And what mistake is that, buddy?" Marcus's eyes narrowed, and in an instant, his calm demeanor shifted into something far more imposing. "I'm Captain Marcus Harris, the new captain of this precinct." For a moment, Greg's mind went blank. His body stiffened, and his smug expression disappeared as if it had been erased in a single second. He blinked, his heart pounding. What did you just say?" he stammered. Marcus repeated himself, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'm the new captain, and you just assaulted me. I'm pressing charges." The color drained from Greg's face. His palms began to sweat as the weight of what he had done slowly settled in. This wasn't just any man he had punched. This was the man who now controlled his career and his fate. Marcus didn't give Greg the chance to recover. He calmly pulled out his wallet and flashed his official ID. Greg stood there, frozen, his mind racing. The realization that he had just punched his own superior officer hit him like a freight train. Marcus held the ID up to Greg's face and said, "This should clear things up. But just to make it crystal clear, you assaulted a superior officer. I'm pressing charges, and you're going to answer for this." Greg opened his mouth, but no words came out. The arrogance that had burned through him just moments before was gone, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. He could feel the eyes of the few onlookers who had gathered watching him. They had all seen what happened. Some were even recording it on their phones, capturing the entire scene. A cold chill ran down Greg's spine. The thought that this could end up on the news, or worse, go viral, was a nightmare he couldn't escape. In the distance, the unmistakable wail of sirens cut through the tension. Within moments, 2 squad cars pulled up, their lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Officers Greg recognized, his colleagues, stepped out. His heart raced as they approached. These were the people he had laughed with, shared coffee breaks with, joked around with. But now they were here to witness his downfall. Sergeant Parker, a no-nonsense officer who'd been with the department for over 20 years, stepped forward first. She gave a quick nod to Marcus, then glanced at Greg, raising an eyebrow. "Captain Harris," she said, her tone professional. Her eyes shifted to Greg, confusion flickering across her face. "What's going on here?" "I'm pressing charges against Officer Matt," Marcus said flatly. "He punched me in the face, unprovoked." Sergeant Parker's eyes went wide, her face tightening. She turned sharply to Greg. "Is this true?" For the first time in his career, Greg didn't have a quick comeback. He stammered, his usual bravado crumbling away. I didn't know he was the captain," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Parker didn't hesitate. "Whether you knew or not doesn't matter. You assaulted a superior officer." Her voice was firm, unwavering. She turned to the other officers behind her and gave a subtle nod. "Cuff him." 2 officers, men Greg had shared quiet moments with, stepped forward. They moved with the precision of experienced officers, their faces hard, no hint of the camaraderie they once shared. They handcuffed Greg without resistance. He didn't even try to fight it. He knew it was over. As they secured the cuffs, Sergeant Parker turned back to Marcus. "Captain, we've got it from here. Is there anything else?" Marcus shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Just make sure this is handled by the book, Sergeant. I'll be pressing formal charges when we get back to the station." Greg was led to the squad car, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists as they shoved him inside. As the car pulled away from Maple Street, the weight of his downfall hit him like a ton of bricks. Just moments ago, he had felt untouchable. Now, he was nothing more than a criminal in the back of a squad car, his career in ruins. The city that had once felt like his playground now seemed a million miles away. The badge he wore had brought him nothing but shame. And as the car sped down the road, all Greg could think was how quickly everything he had worked for, everything he had taken for granted, had fallen apart.